I don't know exactly when I knew. That's the honest answer. I've been trying to pin it to a specific moment for months now, and I can't. It wasn't one thing. It was a slow accumulation of things that shouldn't have meant anything on their own, but kept stacking up in the back of my head until the weight of them got heavy enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. My job is noticing things. Or it was. 15 years of sitting across from teenagers and getting them to tell me what they wouldn't tell their parents. I got pretty good at reading what people weren't saying. Body language, patterns of absence, the specific kind of deflection that means something serious versus the kind that just means the kid is embarrassed. I was decent at my job. I want to say that because what I did, pulling you two out of school, throwing everything into the truck, driving 300 miles to Grandpa Floyd's cabin, on what probably looked like no reason at all, that wasn't me panicking. I need you to understand that. It was me doing the exact same thing I'd been doing for 15 years, just on a larger scale. The first thing I noticed was the absences. This was a Tuesday, 3 weeks before everything fell apart. I'm going through the attendance reports the way I do every Tuesday morning. The school district emails them out, and I print them and go through them looking for patterns. Kids who are missing class too often. That kind of thing. Standard practice. I've been doing it so long it's almost automatic. Coffee in one hand, pencil in the other, just scanning down the list. And there was this cluster. 7 kids, all absent that Tuesday. That's not weird by itself. We averaged 4 or 5 absences a day normally, so 7 is maybe a little high, but not alarming. What made me stop was where they lived. I looked up the addresses, which I do when kids have been absent more than 2 days running, and all 7 of them lived within about 6 blocks of each other, northeast part of town, near the water treatment plant on Ellery Road. 7 kids from the same 6-block radius, all absent the same day. I sat with that for a few minutes, and then looked back at the previous week's reports. 3 of those same kids had been out Friday too. 2 of them had been absent the Thursday before that. I got up and went to find Nurse Heller, whose name was actually Denise, but everyone called her Nurse Heller. And she was a practical woman in her late 50s, who'd been at the school longer than I had. She knew every kid's medical history, and she had a very low threshold for drama, which I respected. I asked her if she'd noticed anything going around, specifically in the northeast part of the district. She looked at me for a second in a way I didn't quite know what to do with. Not suspicious, not dismissive, just measuring, like she was deciding something. Stomach stuff, she said. Vomiting, some fever. Parents are keeping them home. All from the same neighborhood? Garrett. She said my name in a tone that landed somewhere between warning and apology. I'd let it go. I didn't let it go. I'm not saying that to sound dramatic. I genuinely tried to let it go. I went back to my office and worked on some other stuff. A junior named Eddie, who was chronically cutting AP chemistry, and a situation with 2 sophomore girls who had been in a social media argument that had spilled into the hallway twice that week. Normal Tuesday work. I drank more coffee. I ate half a granola bar and forgot about the other half. But I kept coming back to it, because let it go is not what you say about a stomach bug. Around 11 that morning, a kid came to see me. His name was Trevor Mackey. He was a senior, 17, one of those kids who's just slightly more serious than his peers. Not in a bad way, just more tuned in, more present. He was in AP Environmental Science, and he'd told me once that he wanted to study hydrology in college, which I'd had to look up, but it was the study of water systems. Good kid, mostly came to see me for college application stuff. He knocked on my door and sat down, and I could tell immediately something was wrong. He was pale, in a specific way that wasn't illness exactly. It was the pallor of someone who hadn't slept and had been thinking too hard. I've seen it hundreds of times. The eyes have a dried-out quality. "You okay, Trevor?" He looked at his hands. "Yeah, I had a question about the early admission deadline." It wasn't about the early admission deadline. I answered the question anyway because that's what you do. You let them get there at their own pace. But he was distracted while I was talking, glancing at the window, chewing the inside of his cheek. "Is there something else you wanted to talk about?" Long pause. "My uncle works at the water treatment plant, the one on Ellery Road." "Okay." He didn't come home last night. My aunt called us. The plant was just... He stopped. There were cars still in the parking lot, but nobody answered when she called. She called the city and they said everything was fine. They were just doing overnight maintenance or something. I looked at him. Do you know if your uncle is okay? My aunt hasn't heard from him. He said it carefully. And 3 of my friends from my street have been out sick this week. And my mom's been telling me not to drink the tap water. She won't tell me why. We looked at each other. Trevor, do you want me to see if I can find out what's going on at the plant? He shook his head. I don't know. I don't know what I want. I had a bad feeling, and I didn't know who else to tell. He left 5 minutes later. I sat in my chair and looked at the wall. I called the city's public works department that afternoon. Got put on hold twice, transferred once, and then got a very practiced-sounding woman who told me there had been a minor contamination event at the Ellery Road facility, that it was fully contained, that residents were being notified through the standard channels, and that the water was safe for use. She sounded like she was reading from a script. I asked what kind of contamination. She said she wasn't authorized to discuss specifics, but could confirm it was fully contained. I asked when residents were being notified. She said the notifications had gone out. I hadn't gotten any notification. I lived about 12 blocks from the Ellery Road plant. That night I took a longer look at the CDC's weekly illness surveillance reports, which are public record and posted online. Boring stuff mostly. Weekly flu tracking, foodborne illness clusters, that kind of thing. I looked at the reports for our county. Normal numbers, nothing flagged. Then I looked at the hospital admissions data for the county, which is a little harder to find, but not impossible. It's posted quarterly though, not weekly, so I couldn't get current numbers. I went to bed feeling unsettled in a way I couldn't name. The next day, Wednesday, Nurse Heller wasn't in. Substitute nurse, a young guy I'd never seen before, didn't know anything about anything. I asked where Denise was, and the front office said she'd called in sick. Denise Heller had never missed a day in 6 years. I knew this because she'd made a point of mentioning it once when we were talking about the district's sick day policy. 9 kids absent that day, 8 of them from the Northeast cluster on my map. I called my brother Dale at lunch. Dale was, I should say, an ER nurse at Allegheny General in Pittsburgh, and I knew that if something was going on in hospitals, he'd either know about it or be able to find out quickly. We talked most Sundays, so it wasn't unusual for me to call. He picked up on the 3rd ring, which was unusual because he's almost always on shift at noon. You on break? I asked. Day off. What's up? Are you getting anything weird in the ER? Like unusual admissions? Pause. Why? I'm seeing something at school that's making me nervous. A cluster of sick kids from one neighborhood, near a water treatment plant. The city gave me a runaround when I called. Another pause. Longer. What kind of sick? Stomach? Fever? But one kid's uncle worked at the plant and didn't come home. Dale was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Garrett. Yeah. I'm going to tell you something and I need you to listen to me carefully. Can you do that? I was already standing up from my desk. Something about his voice. Yeah, tell me. We've had 5 admissions in the last 9 days that don't fit any standard illness pattern. Violent, confused, high fever, aggressive, and then they don't stabilize. 2 of them coded. One of them, he stopped. I wasn't on that night, but I talked to one of the nurses who was, and she said the patient had to be restrained. That's not normal. Septic patients don't usually have to be physically restrained. What's causing it? Nobody's saying. The 2 attending physicians who handled those cases are both on leave. The administration sent a memo about new protocols for certain admissions, but it was vague as hell. Garrett, he stopped again. I could hear him exhale. My buddy Russ works dispatch for the county. He told me off the record that they've had about 12 ambulance calls in the past week that were classified differently than normal, like they were rerouted. The patients weren't going to the hospital. Where were they going? He didn't know. I sat back down. My coffee was cold. I looked at the half-eaten granola bar on my desk. Dale, What do you think this is? I think I don't want to think about what I think this is, he said. I think you should take those kids of yours and go somewhere for a while. Take a week off. Go camping or something. It's the middle of October. Then go to Mom's. Just get out of that city for a bit. We talked for another 10 minutes without really saying anything else. He was scared. I could hear it. Dale is not someone who scares easily. He ran toward trouble for a living. After I hung up, I sat in my chair for a while. The sounds of the school around me. Lockers slamming, the PA system crackle, some kid laughing loud down the hall. All of it felt slightly unreal, like I was hearing it through water. I went back to my spreadsheet of absences and looked at it for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called your mom. This is the part of the story I've gone back and forth on telling you. I've tried to figure out how to say it without it coming out wrong. Your mom and I have had our problems, and I'm not going to relitigate all of that here, but she is not a stupid person, and she is not a bad mother. What she is, what she was, that day, is someone who wasn't ready to hear what I was trying to tell her. I called her at work. She picked up sounding distracted. Hey, she said. This week's not good. I've got the Hensley account going sideways. Donna, I need to talk to you about the kids. A shift in her voice. What happened? Nothing happened. I'm going to pull them from school for a while and take them somewhere. I want to take them to Floyd's cabin. Silence. That cabin in West Virginia. Yeah, in October. Donna, I know how this sounds. Why? Flat, not a question. I'm seeing something at work that's making me nervous. Absences that don't make sense. A weird thing at the water treatment plant near the school. Dale said the ER has been having... Garrett, are you seriously? She stopped, chose her next words carefully. Are you seriously telling me you want to pull our kids out of school and drive 300 miles to a shack in the woods because of attendance records? It's not just attendance records, it's... Nora has an AP history test Thursday. Eli has a soccer thing Saturday. I know. No, this is the catastrophizing thing you do. Remember 2 years ago, when you were convinced the mold in the basement was going to kill us all, and it was just normal basement mold? This is different. You always say it's different. I took a breath. Donna, will you just listen to me for 5 minutes? I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to listen. She listened. I told her everything. The cluster of absences. Trevor Mackey's uncle. Nurse Heller not showing up. The city's scripted response. What Dale said. The whole thing. She was quiet through all of it, which was actually more worrying than if she'd been interrupting, because Donna always interrupted. Okay, she said when I finished. Okay? Okay, I hear you. I hear that you're worried. Beat. I'm not pulling the kids from school. I'm not doing that. Donna, if you want to take them out for a long weekend, fine. You have them Wednesday through Friday anyway. That's your call. But I'm not endorsing a week-long panic trip to a cabin because a guidance counselor thinks something is wrong with the water. I'm the guidance counselor. I know. I'm talking about myself. I know, Garrett. She sounded tired. Take them to the cabin if you want. I'll come get them Monday. They need to be back for school by Monday. She hung up. I looked at the phone in my hand for a while. Then I looked at the calendar on my desk. It was Wednesday the 14th. I had you two starting after school that day. Wednesday was always the day you came to stay with me. I was going to pick you up at 3:30. I opened my laptop and looked up driving time to Floyd's cabin. 4 hours and 20 minutes. Back roads would add maybe 40 minutes. I closed the laptop. Then I opened it again and started making a list. I've always been a list person. There's something about writing things down that makes the fear manageable. When I was younger, I thought it was a coping mechanism. Later, I decided it was just how my brain worked. I think my lists have probably annoyed every person who's ever lived with me, but that afternoon they probably saved your lives. The list started as supplies and ended up as a whole reorganization of the next 24 hours. I needed to stop at the store before picking you up. I needed to pack the truck that night. I needed to make sure Floyd's cabin was actually in usable condition. I hadn't been out there in 18 months. Last time was the summer before 8th grade. You'll remember it, or maybe you won't. Eli, you were still pretty young. I wrote down everything I could think of. Food, water, first aid, tools. I thought about Floyd and what he always kept at that cabin. Because Floyd was a practical man, from a practical generation, who understood that you might be stuck somewhere for a week or two, and you needed to be ready for that. He kept a root cellar stocked. He kept the gun cabinet full. I wrote check ammo on the list. That was the first moment it felt real in a way I didn't want to sit with too long. At 3 o'clock, I walked down to Principal Garver's office and knocked on the doorframe. He was reading something on his computer and he looked up with that expression he had, the one that meant he was mildly annoyed at the interruption. "Garrett, what's up?" "I'm taking a personal day Thursday and Friday," I said, "and I'm pulling Nora and Eli from school as of today." He looked at me. "They go to Jefferson, don't they?" "Yeah. I'm going to call the office there now. Is everything okay?" I thought about all the ways I could answer that question. "Family situation," I said. "I'll have my lesson plans. My caseload covered. I'll email Shelby." He let me go without too much of an argument, which I was grateful for. I think I probably looked like I had something personal going on. He was decent enough not to pry. I called Jefferson Middle and Elementary and went through the slightly awkward process of pulling you both early. They asked if everything was okay. I said family situation. They let me. I picked you up at 3:30. You were both surprised. Nora, you got in the car with your backpack and gave me the look you give me sometimes. The one where you're trying to figure out if you're in trouble. "Why are we leaving early?" "I'll explain on the way to the store," I said. "Put your seatbelt on." "What store?" "Walmart. Then home. Then we're going to pack and drive to Grandpa Floyd's cabin tonight." Eli, from the back seat. "Tonight?" "Yeah, tonight." "Like right now tonight?" "Yeah, Bud." You were quiet for a second, and I saw in the rearview mirror that your face was doing the thing it does when you're excited, but you're trying not to be too obvious about it, because your sister is rolling her eyes. "Cool," you said, very casually. Nora was less casual. "Dad, I have AP history on Thursday." "I know. We're doing the whole French Revolution unit, and if I miss the review, I'll help you study in the car." "You don't know anything about the French Revolution." "I know more than you think." She made a sound that communicated deep skepticism. We drove. At Walmart, I got a cart and started working through my list systematically, which I know probably looked strange to anyone watching. A guy moving fast through the store with purpose, throwing things in a cart without much deliberation. I'd done the math in my head. I was buying for 4 people. Myself, you two, and I'd mentally added a 4th slot. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew we might end up with someone else at the cabin. Just a gut feeling. 4 people for 3 weeks minimum. I bought canned goods. A lot of canned goods. Beans, soup, tuna, vegetables, fruit, pasta and rice, peanut butter. I remember you looking at how many jars I put in the cart, Eli, and your eyes went wide. I bought oats and cornmeal and flour, sugar and salt, coffee because I cannot function without coffee. I bought water purification tablets and iodine drops. I bought a water filter, the kind you can use with a pump on a stream or a river. Good for a lot of gallons before the filter needs replacing. I bought a first aid kit and then supplemented it. Extra gauze, antiseptic, antibiotic ointment, pain reliever. I bought a lot of ibuprofen. I bought SAM splints and an ACE bandage. I bought more of Eli's allergy medication than I probably should have. The pharmacist at the counter looked at me for a second, but didn't say anything. I bought batteries, a lot of batteries. I bought flashlights and 2 hand crank lanterns. I bought a shortwave radio that ran on both batteries and a hand crank. I bought matches and lighters and fire starters. I bought a good tarp and some paracord. I bought heavy work gloves. I went through the sporting goods section and looked at what they had. They had a small selection of hunting stuff. I bought a box of 30-30 cartridges, which I already knew was the caliber of Floyd's Winchester. I bought a cleaning kit. Total came to just under $800. The checkout lady, a tired-looking woman in her late 40s, scanned everything without comment until she got to the 4th jar of peanut butter. She looked at it, then at me, then at the rest of the cart. "You doing Y2K or something?" she said. I smiled. Just like to be prepared. She went back to scanning. Didn't say anything else. You two were mostly quiet in the checkout line. Nora was reading the back of a box of crackers. Eli was staring at the ammo box I'd put in the cart. He looked up at me with a question on his face, and I gave him a slight headshake. Not here. We'll talk later. He nodded seriously. We loaded everything in the truck and drove home. I want to tell you something about that evening, because you might not remember it the way I do. There was a moment. We were home. I was packing the truck. Nora was helping because she's like me in that way. She'll argue, but then she'll also help. And the news was on in the background on the small TV in the kitchen. It was the 6 o'clock local news. Nothing dramatic, just the regular stuff. Some city council thing. Weather. A traffic accident on Route 30. And then there was a short segment, maybe 45 seconds, about a series of reported assaults in Greenfield. That's a neighborhood in Pittsburgh, about 20 miles from where we lived. 3 separate incidents that afternoon. Victims reported the individuals appeared disoriented and were extremely aggressive. 1 victim hospitalized. Police were investigating and urging residents to be cautious. The anchor said it in the same tone you'd use to talk about a minor traffic accident. Moving on, here's Jared with the weather. I watched Jared tell me about a cold front coming in. I went back to packing. We were on the road by 9 that night. You were both in the back seat in your pajamas with your pillows, which is how we'd always done long drives, since you were little, because it meant you'd sleep through most of it and wake up somewhere new. I had the heat going. Eli was asleep before we got to the highway. Nora lasted about 45 minutes, long enough to ask me, quietly, in the dark of the car, what was really going on. I told her the truth, not all of it, and I softened the parts that would have scared her too much. But the truth. I told her I'd been seeing something worrying at school, that the hospitals might be dealing with something unusual, that I wanted to be cautious and get somewhere safe for a while. She looked at me for a long moment. In the dark of the car, I could see her face in the greenish light of the dashboard. Like a disease? She said. Maybe. Like what kind of disease? I don't know yet. She was quiet. When are we coming back? I'm not sure. She absorbed that. Then, I'm going to need my books. I only have my backpack. We'll figure it out. She was quiet for a while. I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, I heard the news thing, about Greenfield. I kept my eyes on the road. Yeah, that's not that far from school. I know. Another silence. Then she pulled her blanket up around her shoulders and tucked her face into the edge of her pillow, and that was that. She didn't ask any more questions. She trusted me, or she was too tired to argue, one of the two. Either way, she went to sleep, and I drove in the dark through the Pennsylvania hills, with the radio on low, flipping between stations, looking for anything that would tell me I was right, or tell me I was crazy. I would have been glad to be crazy. I didn't find much. There was a brief mention on an NPR affiliate about a public health situation in 2 Pennsylvania counties that was being monitored by state health officials. That was it. No details, no alarm, just the careful, dry language of institutions trying not to say the word for whatever they're looking at. I drove. The hills got bigger and darker. The other cars thinned out. By midnight, there was nobody on the road but me. We pulled up to Floyd's cabin at 1:30 in the morning. I want to describe it to you the way I saw it that night, arriving in the dark, headlights sweeping across the front of it, because I think that image is one I'm going to carry for a long time. It's not impressive. I want to be honest about that. It's a single-story log cabin, small by any real standard. 1 main room that serves as kitchen and living area, 2 small bedrooms, a bathroom with a composting toilet, and a shower that runs off a propane-heated water tank. The porch, runs the full width of the front. There's a covered woodshed attached to the left side of the cabin. Behind it is a small outbuilding, maybe 12 by 12, that Floyd used as a tool shed and general-purpose storage. The property is about 3 acres cleared, mostly flat, and then the forest starts hard on all sides. The nearest paved road is 1.5 miles away. To get to the cabin, you take a dirt track that branches off from a county road I'd have to look up the name of. And the track isn't marked, and isn't maintained. and you'd miss it easily if you didn't know it was there. Floyd had a small sign once, just his name on a piece of routed wood, but it fell off years ago and he never replaced it. That's what I thought about when I pulled up that night. Nobody knew this place was here. Nobody but family. I sat in the truck for a minute looking at the dark cabin, listening to you two breathe in the back seat. Then I got out and went to find the key under the third flagstone on the porch, which is where Floyd always kept it, which I'd known since I was 12 years old. The cabin smelled the way it always smelled. Wood smoke and old oil and something faintly like pine resin and leather. The smell of Floyd himself in a way, or at least the memory of him. He'd been gone 6 years. His reading glasses were still on the small table next to his chair. I'd never been able to move them. I turned on the generator to get the lights working, got you both inside, and put you in the back bedroom that had the 2 narrow bunks Floyd had built when my dad and uncle were young. You barely woke up. Nora muttered something. Eli made the sound he makes when he's transitioning between sleep and awake, and then went straight back under. I went back out to the truck and started unloading. I want to fast forward here a little because the first full day at the cabin, that Thursday, was mostly practical and not very interesting to describe. I woke up at 6, before either of you, and spent the first hour going through the cabin, systematically taking inventory of what Floyd had left. The root cellar, accessed through a trap door in the kitchen floor, was better than I'd hoped. Floyd had been the kind of person who rotated stock. He always kept it full and he always used and replaced. So nothing in there was old enough to be bad. There were probably 60 or 70 cans of various things. A lot of soup, some tomatoes, green beans, corn. There were sealed jars of his own canning, maybe 40 jars of different things, peaches and apple butter and pickled vegetables. There were 2 5-gallon buckets of rice, sealed with Gamma Seal lids, a bucket of dried beans, a canister of oats, salt, sugar, an assortment of spices. There was also, and this surprised me, a case and a half of bottled water, about 30 liters, and a note in Floyd's handwriting, rubber banded to one of the bottles, for emergencies. I'd never noticed it before, because I'd never had reason to go into the root cellar in winter. Floyd had prepared it. He'd prepared it, and now it was here. I sat down on the cellar floor and looked at it all for a while. The gun cabinet in the living room held the 30-30 Winchester Model 94 that I'd remembered, with about 200 rounds in a box on the bottom shelf. A .22 rifle, a Marlin, with 300 rounds. A 12-gauge shotgun, Remington 870, with 2 boxes of shells, 1 buckshot and 1 birdshot. A handgun, which surprised me, a .357 revolver I hadn't known Floyd kept there, with a single box of 50 rounds. There was also a crossbow leaning in the corner of the cabinet, an older model, with about 20 bolts in a quiver hanging on the wall beside it. I stood in front of the gun cabinet for a long time. I was thinking about the fact that I hadn't fired a gun in maybe 7 years. Floyd had taken me hunting a few times when I was a teenager, and I'd gone out with him a couple times in my 20s, and after he died I'd taken a basic gun safety refresher because I knew the cabin would be coming to me, and I wanted to be responsible. But I wasn't a gun person. I had no training beyond the basics. I wrote practice shooting on my list. The generator was a 6-kilowatt propane unit in a shed behind the cabin, connected to 2 500-gallon propane tanks that were buried partially in the ground. Floyd had gotten the big tanks installed years ago because he hated running out of fuel. I checked the levels. Both tanks were reading around 60%. That was a substantial amount of propane. Enough to run the generator for weeks if we were careful. More if we were very careful. The well was hand pump, with an electric backup. Floyd had installed the electric pump when he got the generator, but kept the hand pump functional because he was smart like that. The water was good. Floyd had always gotten it tested, and it came from a deep aquifer, nothing to do with the municipal system. I spent that first morning working through a checklist in my head, methodically. I tested the propane stove. Working. I tested the hot water. Working after a few minutes. I checked the roof for obvious damage. Looked fine. I checked the windows and doors. The cabin had good, solid old wood construction. Not the modern stuff that feels hollow when you knock on it. The front door had a deadbolt and a crossbar that slid into iron brackets on either side of the door frame. The back door had the same. Floyd had installed those years ago, when there was some trouble with someone breaking into cabins in the area. I think it was just kids doing stupid things. But Floyd didn't mess around with security. I looked at the windows. They were single pane, older, with simple latches. I wrote window reinforcement on my list. There was a stack of plywood sheets in the tool shed, left over from a project Floyd had never finished. I counted 7 sheets of 3/4 inch. That was enough for most of the windows. I had you help me start unloading the truck from the Walmart trip. Eli, you were excited about the whole thing in the way you are when something is outside of normal. You asked about 12 questions while we were hauling groceries, and at one point you found a daddy longlegs in the cellar and spent 5 minutes watching it, which made the unloading take longer, but I didn't have the heart to rush you. Nora was quiet but competent, which is your mode when you've accepted a situation but haven't fully gotten on board with it. You carried boxes without complaining, and you organized the shelving in the root cellar better than I would have, grouping things by type. Around 10 that morning, I turned on the radio. The shortwave could get regular AM stations, and I found the Pittsburgh affiliate that ran news most of the day. The Thursday morning news was, carefully, nothing. That's the only way I can describe it. There were 3 separate segments about things I'd have expected to be significant. There was a brief mention of civil disturbances in Pittsburgh overnight, another brief mention of a health advisory issued by the state health department, and a line about the National Guard being on standby following a request from the governor. But each of these was treated as minor, sandwiched between the weather and a story about a local food bank fundraiser. And the tone of the anchors was the specific, careful tone of people who've been told not to say more than they're saying. Civil disturbances, health advisory, National Guard on standby. I wrote those down. I thought about Trevor Mackey and his uncle, and the water treatment plant, and I thought about what Dale had told me, and I sat with all of it for a while, with my coffee going cold in my hand. Then I got up and started cutting plywood. I want to be honest about the feeling of those first 2 days at the cabin, because looking back, I think it was a strange kind of limbo that I don't know if I can fully describe. Part of my brain was certain something bad was coming. The part that had seen the absences and talked to Dale and heard the specific way that city official had refused to give me any real information. That part was already in it, already treating this as the thing it was going to become. But another part of my brain was still operating in the normal world, still thinking in terms of school days and bills and whether the oil in the truck was overdue for a change. The normal world doesn't just switch off, you carry it with you. The news from that world was, I'd pulled my 2 kids out of school for no obvious reason. I'd driven 4.5 hours in the middle of the night. I was now boarding up windows in an old cabin in the West Virginia hills. If everything I was worried about turned out to be nothing, a local contamination event, an isolated cluster of unusual illness, some kind of manageable public health thing, I was going to have to explain this to Donna and to Principal Garver and eventually to you two, and that conversation was not going to be fun. I thought about that while I was cutting plywood. I thought about the conversations I was going to have if I was wrong. Then I thought about the 7 kids absent from my attendance report, and Denise Heller not showing up to work, and Dale's voice when he told me about the patients who had to be restrained. I kept cutting. We got 6 of the 8 windows covered with plywood that first day. I left 2 uncovered, the one in the main room that faced the front of the property, because I wanted to be able to see out, and the small window in the kitchen that I could crack for ventilation when cooking. For the covered ones, I screwed the plywood from the inside so it couldn't just be pulled off from the outside. I used 3-inch screws, and I drove them in every 6 inches around the perimeter of each sheet. Nora asked me why we were boarding up the windows. I said I wanted the cabin to be more insulated for cold weather. She gave me a look that said she didn't buy it, but wasn't going to push yet. That night we ate pasta with canned tomato sauce, and it felt almost normal. I put on the camp lantern over the table because the overhead light in the main room was too bright, and I thought it might be visible from outside, which was probably paranoid, but I was leaning into the paranoia at that point. We ate, and I asked you both about school, your friends, your classes, what you'd been working on, and we talked for maybe an hour. Eli, you told me about this thing your science teacher had said about fungi, and how they communicate through underground networks. You'd been thinking about it all week. You asked me if I thought that meant forests were basically one organism. I said I didn't know, maybe. You thought about that for a while, and then said you thought that made forests better than cities. Because in a city, everyone was separate, and in a forest, everything was connected. I didn't say anything to that. I just looked at you across the table in the lantern light. After you were both in bed, I sat on the porch for a while. It was cold, October in the Highlands, probably 40 degrees, and the sky was very clear, the kind of clear you never get in the city. Stars all the way to the horizon. The forest was quiet, in the way forests at night aren't really quiet. There were sounds, constant small sounds, wind and branches, and something moving in the leaf litter at the edge of the trees. But it was a different kind of sound than the city. It didn't have the underlying thrum that cities have, the white noise of machinery and traffic that you stop noticing until it's gone. I sat out there for a long time. I thought about Floyd, and what he would have made of all this. He was a man who didn't say much, but who knew a lot. Specifically, he knew how to read situations and animals and weather and other people. He used to take me out to the deer stand when I was 14, and we'd sit for 3 or 4 hours without saying more than a handful of words, and he'd notice things, birds that moved wrong, wind shifts, tracks in the mud that I walked past without seeing. He told me once that most people go through the world making assumptions about what they're going to see, and so they see what they expect and miss what's actually there. You have to train yourself to look at what's in front of you, not what you think is in front of you. I'd tried to do that. For 15 years, I'd tried to do that with teenagers, and I'd gotten good at it. Now I was trying to do it with whatever was happening in the world outside this cabin, and I wasn't sure I was reading it right, but I was trying. I went to bed around midnight. Before I went in, I stood on the porch for a minute and looked out at the tree line. The forest was dark beyond the cleared land, just shapes and deeper darkness. Nothing there, just trees. I went inside and locked the front door. The second day, that Friday, I did more preparation, and the news got harder to ignore. I started in the morning with a complete sweep of the exterior. I walked the perimeter of the 3-acre clearing, looking at the approach from every direction, thinking about what you could see from the woods and what you could see from the cabin. The driveway came in from the northwest. The forest was closest on the south and east sides, maybe 30 yards from the cabin at the nearest point. On the north side, there was an open grassy area that Floyd had kept mowed for a kitchen garden, now just long yellowing grass in October, and beyond that was a small pond, maybe 60 feet across, that Floyd used for fishing. The pond was good, fresh water within 100 feet of the cabin, and it wasn't connected to any municipal system. Good. I also noticed, for the first time really looking, that the cabin sat in a slight depression between 2 long ridges. From a distance, you wouldn't see the cabin at all. You'd see the ridge lines and the trees, and you'd never know the clearing was there unless you came in from the northwest on the track. The cabin had natural concealment. Floyd had built it that way on purpose. I remembered him saying once that he didn't want his place to be visible from the road, because he didn't want visitors who hadn't been invited. I walked back inside feeling a little better. The location was good. I spent the morning making trip after trip into the tool shed, pulling out everything useful and sorting it by category on the porch. Floyd had a good collection of hand tools, saws, hammers, a draw knife, an axe that still had an edge on it, various specialty things I didn't know the use of. There were coils of wire, bolts and screws in coffee cans, pipe fittings. There was a chainsaw that turned over when I pulled the cord, which was a small miracle. There were gas cans, 4 of them, 2 5-gallon and 2 2.5, and I checked them, and 3 of the 4 were full. Floyd had always kept them full with ethanol-free fuel and a stabilizer additive. Good man. Around 11 that morning, the radio went to something I hadn't heard yet. A formal statement from the Pennsylvania Department of Health. It ran for maybe 4 minutes, read by an official who sounded like he was trying very hard to stay calibrated and not quite making it. The summary. There was an ongoing public health situation in multiple Pennsylvania counties. The nature of the illness was under investigation. Residents in certain counties were advised to shelter in place, avoid contact with individuals showing symptoms of aggression, confusion, or extreme fever, and to contact emergency services if they encountered such individuals. The official said, and I wrote this down word for word because I was already sitting at the table with a notepad, do not attempt to physically restrain or interact with affected individuals. Maintain distance and contact authorities immediately. Don't physically interact with affected individuals. That's not what you say about sick people. That's what you say about dangerous people. The broadcast went on to list affected counties. Our home county was on the list. So were 6 others. I sat at the table for a while. Eli was outside looking at something near the pond. Nora was on the porch with a book. I could see her through the window. I thought about Donna. I called her. She didn't pick up. I called again, 5 minutes later. She still didn't pick up. I left a voicemail. Donna, I'm seeing the news. I'm at the cabin with the kids. I need you to listen to this Department of Health statement that just ran, and call me back. I need you to think about coming out here. I know you think I'm being paranoid. I need you to call me back. She didn't call back that day. She texted me at 2 in the afternoon. I heard. I'm fine. I'm staying at Sandra's for a few days. The kids are okay? I texted back. Kids are fine. Please come out here. She sent a thumbs up emoji. That was the last message I got from her for 11 days. The rest of that Friday, I split my attention between preparation and the radio. More military plane sounds overhead. You could hear them from outside, high and south, and I couldn't tell what kind. The radio moved from calibrated public health statements to something more fragmented as the afternoon went on. There were gaps in programming. There was a long stretch of maybe 20 minutes where one station went to music, an oldies station, just playing songs, and then came back with a different anchor who sounded genuinely shaken in a way the earlier ones hadn't, talking about reports of significant unrest in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and asking people to stay inside. That evening, you both knew something was wrong. Not wrong in the abstract way that grown-ups talk about things being wrong, but wrong in the immediate specific way, where you can feel it in the air of a room. Nora, you came and sat next to me while I was at the table with the radio. You didn't say anything, you just sat there. After a while you said, "It's really bad, isn't it?" I looked at you. You were 14, and you were trying to look like you could handle whatever I told you, and I could see the effort of it. I thought about the version of you from 2 days ago, annoyed about AP history. I think it might get pretty bad, I said. Yeah. You nodded. You sat there for a while longer. Okay, you said finally, and got up and went to check on Eli, which was very much a Nora thing to do, in a way that made my chest hurt. I slept badly that Friday night. I kept waking up and lying there in the dark, listening to the forest and going back over my lists, checking things off in my head, worrying about what I'd missed, what I hadn't done yet. Figured out the perimeter alarm situation. Floyd had a dog for years, but the dog had died a few years before Floyd did, and he'd never gotten another one. I thought about the fact that we had no early warning if someone or something came across the clearing at night. What I also hadn't done, figure out an exit strategy. If we had to leave the cabin in a hurry, where would we go, and how would we get there? I lay in the dark and thought about those 2 things until I fell back asleep around 4 in the morning. Saturday was the day the world broke. I woke up before dawn and turned on the radio, and the station I'd been listening to was gone, just static. I moved to another station, gone too. A third gave me, on and off through heavy interference, what sounded like an emergency broadcast signal. The tone, then automated text read by a machine voice. Shelter in place, avoid contact with infected individuals, do not travel on major roadways, wait for official guidance. I stood in the kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold because I'd forgotten I was holding it. After maybe 10 minutes, the broadcast cycled back, and there was a human voice. A man, older sounding, who was clearly reading from a script, but was also clearly frightened, because there was a slight crack in his voice on certain words. He gave a county-by-county breakdown. Our county, not the cabin, but our home county back east, was described as critical zone, avoid travel. Multiple counties all across the western part of the state were affected. The phrase affected individuals was doing a lot of work. So was the phrase Extreme caution. Then the broadcast dropped to static again. I went and knocked softly on your door. Nora, Eli, I need you to get up. We're doing some things today. What I needed to do was get up onto the ridge and see what was happening on the highway. The ridge to the east of the cabin was about a half-mile walk through the trees, and at the top of it, Floyd had shown me this years ago, you could see down into the valley where Route 219 ran, and on a clear day, you could see a significant stretch of it. It was a fire break on that ridge, a swath of cleared ground maybe 40 feet wide that the Forest Service maintained, and from there, the view opened up. I left you both at the cabin with strict instructions. Nora, I made you the responsible one. You knew how to work the deadbolt and the crossbar. You knew which gun was which and where I kept the shells. And I had a conversation with you that morning about the .22 rifle that I am still not entirely comfortable with having had to have. But there we were. I showed you how to work the safety and how to load it, and told you that it was an absolute last resort and that you were to keep the doors locked and not open them for anyone you didn't recognize, and not to open them even for someone you did recognize without talking to me on the radio first. I'd found Floyd's old pair of walkie-talkies in the tool shed, charged them overnight, and they worked. We tested the range. From the ridge I could reach the cabin fine. I hiked up to the ridge with Floyd's binoculars around my neck. I'm going to tell you what I saw when I got up there, and I want you to understand that what I'm describing is something I'd been bracing for, but still wasn't ready for when I actually saw it. Route 219 was stopped. Not slow, not backed up the way it gets before a holiday weekend. Stopped, as in, cars were not moving. As far as I could see in both directions, and with the binoculars I could see probably 4 miles of road from the ridge, nothing was moving. It was wall-to-wall cars and trucks, some SUVs and pickups, that had clearly tried to get off the road onto the shoulder and then run out of room there too. It was maybe 7 in the morning. I could see movement down there, people outside their cars, people walking between vehicles, but it was small and slow from this distance, the way ant activity looks small and slow from above. There was smoke. To the south, maybe 8 or 10 miles, there was a column of smoke rising up. Not campfire smoke, a burning something smoke, the kind that's black at the base and spreads out gray and white higher up. A helicopter came over, military-looking, dark, no markings I could make out, moving fast to the southeast. Another one followed about 4 minutes later on the same bearing. I sat on the ridge for 45 minutes and watched and counted. 7 helicopters total. 1 large fixed-wing military transport plane, very high, heading north. The smoke column to the south either didn't grow, or I couldn't tell from this distance. I called you on the radio. How are you doing down there? Nora's voice came back fast. Fine. We're fine. Eli made cereal. What do you see? The highway's jammed. I'm coming back down. I heard Eli in the background asking what that meant. I heard your voice telling him to eat his cereal. On the way back down, I stopped for a second at the edge of the clearing and just looked at the cabin. At the smoke coming from the stovepipe, I'd started a fire in the wood stove that morning, and now I thought about whether the smoke was visible from the road, how far away the road was, whether it mattered. The track from the cabin to the county road was 1.5 miles. The county road itself didn't see much traffic normally. A few local trucks, sometimes a tractor, no through traffic. I decided the risk of someone seeing our wood smoke and tracking it back to us was low enough not to worry about for now. But I noted it. I spent the rest of Saturday in a controlled state of focused action that I think was partly genuine practicality and partly a way to avoid sitting still long enough to get scared. I split 2 hours worth of firewood. I did a full inventory of every single consumable in the cabin, wrote everything down in a notebook, and worked out rough daily calorie consumption for 3 people. At our normal rate of eating, we had about 6 weeks of food. If we cut back to survival portions, enough calories to function but nothing extra, we could stretch it to 9 or 10 weeks. I cooked a real meal for dinner, using some of the fresh food I'd bought at Walmart that would go off first. Pasta again, but with real vegetables and some canned chicken. We sat together and ate, and I told you both, as clearly and calmly as I could, what the situation looked like from where I was standing. I didn't say the word zombie. I want to be clear about that. I didn't say it because I still hadn't seen whatever was out there with my own eyes. And I was not going to tell my children that we were in the middle of the thing the word implies without knowing it for certain. I said, infected people. I said, individuals who are very sick and very dangerous. I said, the kind of sick where they don't know what they're doing and they can hurt people without meaning to. Nora was listening very carefully, the way she listens when she's in problem-solving mode. Eli had put his spoon down. Like a disease? Eli said. That makes people crazy? Something like that. How did they get the disease? I don't know yet. Could we get it? I looked at you, bud. That's why we're being careful. Is Mom okay? That one sat in my chest like a stone. She texted me yesterday and she was fine. She's staying at Sandra's house. Sandra's in Bridgeville, Nora said. I know. Is Bridgeville bad? I don't know. We were all quiet for a minute. Eli picked up his spoon again. Okay, he said. I think you said that a lot during those early days, Eli. Just, okay. And you kept going. I don't know if you understood it all or if you were just trusting me, but either way I was grateful. I still am. I texted Donna again that evening. No response. Sunday morning I woke to the sound of a vehicle on the track. I was up and at the window before I was fully conscious, the crossbar off the door, looking out through the gap in the plywood on the front window. It was just past 6 in the morning, still gray outside. The vehicle came slow down the track, an old battered pickup truck, blue or dark green, hard to tell in the early light. It stopped about 30 yards from the front of the cabin, sat there idling. I had the Trant, .357 in my hand. I'd taken it from the gun cabinet the night before because it was small enough to carry, and I'd decided I should be carrying it. The truck's engine shut off. The door opened. An old man got out, moving slow, one hand on the doorframe to steady himself. He was short and thick-built, wearing canvas work pants and a heavy flannel shirt, and a blaze orange hunting vest. He had a dog, a tan-colored dog of no specific breed, older, moving slow like the man. The man looked at the cabin. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder, muzzle down. He just stood there. I recognized him. Roy Dunning. I'd met him once, maybe 3 years ago, when I'd come out to the cabin alone for a weekend. He'd stopped to introduce himself. He lived about 4 miles up the ridge to the north, had been in the area for decades, had known Floyd. He'd seemed like a man of very few words who nonetheless made each word count. I put the crossbar back on the door, moved to the side window, cracked it. Mr. Dunning. He turned toward the sound of my voice. That you, Garrett? Yeah. You okay? I'm fine. He looked around at the clearing. Mind if I pull up? Come ahead. He walked up to the porch, his dog trotting at his heel. I opened the door. He looked at the plywood on the windows, and then at me. He didn't say anything about either of those things. I knew Floyd Holt's family took over this place, he said. I figured you might have come out when things went sideways. What are you seeing up your way? Saw a couple people on the county road last night. On foot, moving wrong. He set the rifle down, leaning against the porch rail, and put his hands in his pockets. His hands were enormous, knobbed, the hands of a man who'd worked with them for 60 years. They weren't moving like people normally move. They were, he shook his head. I've seen animals move like that. Distemper, sometimes rabies, that kind of sick. Did they come toward you? There was a light on in my place. They came to the window. He was quiet for a second. I shot through the window. I looked at him. I shot through the window, he said again, matter of fact. Then I sat in the dark until morning, and then I came down here. He looked at me. I've got beans and some jerky, and my dog. I'm not looking for charity. I can work. You don't need to make a case, I said. Come in. His name was Roy Dunning. He was 67. He'd been a coal miner for 30 years, and then had retired up here, which he said he'd always intended to do. He didn't have any family nearby, a daughter in Colorado, who he'd tried calling and gotten no answer. He absorbed this information about his daughter, the way he absorbed everything else, without visible expression, just a slight pause before he moved on. Roy had seen them. He could describe them. That was the first time I got a real description of what we were dealing with. Not from the radio's careful language, but from someone who'd stood 20 feet away from one. "They look like people," he said. "At first, they're moving, they're upright, but the gait is wrong. Like they're not. Like the signal is bad, jerky, and they follow sound. When I knocked over a can in my kitchen, they came to the window fast." "Did you see them eat anything?" He looked at me steadily. "Yeah, something in the yard. My neighbor 2 miles down, the Harpers. Their dog." He paused. "The dog was in the yard and they..." "Yeah." I didn't ask for more detail. "How many did you see?" "2. But I heard more, farther on. Sounds carry at night up here." I sat with that. Roy joined us. He set up in the tool shed, which he said was more space than he needed. And he and his dog, the dog's name was Hap, short for something he didn't clarify, slept there the first night on a cot I had in there for when guests came and there wasn't room in the cabin. Roy was handy in the specific unshowy way of men from that generation who'd grown up fixing whatever needed fixing, because there was nobody else to fix it. By the end of his first day with us, he'd restrung the tripwire around the south side of the property that I'd rigged up with cans and was dissatisfied with. He replaced it with something from Floyd's tool shed that was much better, low to the ground, harder to see, and he ran it around 3 sides of the property in a line that would catch anyone moving through the long grass at the perimeter. He showed Eli how he'd done it. You asked about 30 questions. He answered every one. By the second day, you two were thick as thieves. I kept calling Donna. No answer. On the second call, it went straight to voicemail, which meant either her phone was dead or she'd turned it off, and both of those options worried me in different ways. I called Dale. Same thing, straight to voicemail. I didn't let myself think about what that meant for very long at a time. I'd think about it for a few minutes, and then I'd make myself get up and do something with my hands. That Sunday night, I saw the thing in the tree line. I want to be very precise about this, because I've thought about it a lot, and I'm still not sure what I saw. I was on the porch, maybe 10:30 at night. I'd been out there for maybe 20 minutes, just sitting, listening. It was cold, probably 35 degrees, maybe less, and I had Floyd's old wool coat on, and a mug of hot tea, going cold in my hand. The cleared area in front of the cabin was dark, but not completely dark. There was half a moon, and it was clear. I was looking at the tree line on the south side when I noticed it. A shape, at the edge of the trees, where the grass of the clearing meets the first row of trunks, standing. I couldn't tell you what made me notice it. It wasn't moving. It was the wrong shape. Not quite the shape of a tree trunk. Wrong thickness. Wrong positioning relative to the other trunks. I sat very still and looked at it. It didn't move. I looked at it for a long time. I had the binoculars from around my neck and I raised them and looked through them. The dark made it hard. I could see better with my naked eye than through the glass because of the low light. But through the binoculars I could make out 2 legs. Something that was probably a torso. Something that was probably a head. Standing completely still at the edge of the trees. 45 minutes I sat on that porch and watched. 45 minutes. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I sat in the cold and I watched that shape. It didn't move. Not once. It just stood. At some point, maybe 11:15, I looked away for maybe 30 seconds to check that the front door was still latched. When I looked back to the tree line, it was gone. I didn't sleep much that night. I went inside and sat in the chair by the front window until 3 in the morning, and then I made myself go to bed, because I knew I needed to function. In the morning, I went out and walked the south perimeter. The dew was heavy on the grass. If something had been standing at the edge of the trees for 45 minutes, there'd be a depression in the grass, a flattened area. The dew would tell me. I found a flattened area in the long grass, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, right at the edge of the tree line where I'd been watching. The grass was bent in a direction consistent with something having stood there. I also found, 28 feet into the tree line, a deer carcass. It was a doe, probably 110 pounds. It was partially eaten. And what I mean by partially eaten was not the way a predator eats something, not the methodical disembowelment of a coyote, not the bone-crushing damage of a bear. It was I spent 5 minutes crouching over that deer trying to understand what I was looking at. The damage was mostly to the neck and upper body. Bite marks, human-sized bite marks if I was being honest with myself. And I was trying very hard not to be honest with myself about that. No dragging, no kill wound that I could find. The animal hadn't been killed first and then eaten, or at least not from a distance. The eyes were still open, which means the deer had been alive when I stood up from the carcass and walked back to the cabin. I didn't tell Roy. I didn't tell you. I stood in the kitchen for a while and poured a glass of water and drank it slowly. I told myself it could have been anything. I told myself I couldn't be sure of what I'd seen from the porch. I also went into the tool shed and found 3 of Floyd's battery-powered game cameras that he'd used for scouting deer, charged them from the generator, and spent an hour setting them up around the south and east perimeter of the property, angled to cover the tree line. Roy watched me do this and didn't ask any questions. The 3rd day after the highway jammed, which put us about 6 days into being at the cabin total, is when the next people showed up. She came at 11 in the morning. I heard Hap bark first, then the tripwire alarm on the east side, and I was out the door with the 357 before any of it had really registered. Roy was already at the corner of the cabin with his rifle. She was coming across the field from the east, which was not the direction of the road, which told me she hadn't come in by the track. She must have come through the woods. She was moving slow, exhausted slow, not wrong slow, and she was carrying something. A car seat, a baby carrier, one of those infant car seats with the handle, and in it was a baby. I put the gun back in my waistband. Roy lowered the rifle. She stopped about 50 feet out when she saw us. She was young, early 30s, in jeans and a gray sweatshirt that had something on it I couldn't read. She had no bag, no pack, nothing except the car seat. "Are you?" Her voice was hoarse. "Are you okay? Like, you're not?" "We're fine," I said. "Come on, come ahead." She covered the 50 feet in a hurry, and then stopped on the other side of the porch railing and looked at us. "I've got a baby. She's been quiet since yesterday. She needs, can you boil water?" "Come in," I said. "We'll take care of the baby." Her name was Patty Vance. The baby's name, she said, was June, and June was 7 months old and hungry, and wet, but otherwise in good shape. Patty was from Columbus, Ohio, which was a 5-hour drive from where we were, and she had made most of that drive 3 days ago on back roads after the freeway locked up. She'd run out of gas on a county road 6 miles east of us. She'd walked the 6 miles with the baby. She sat on the couch and drank a glass of water without stopping, and then drank another one. I'd heated water on the stove, and Nora, without being asked, which I want you to know I noticed, had found the powdered baby formula that I'd impulsively bought at Walmart and mixed up a bottle. Patty got June fed, and then sat there holding the baby and looking at nothing. Columbus was... She stopped, started again. It was bad. Fast. It was so fast. 2 days ago it was like ambulances on every block, and then the ambulances stopped. And then people started just... She looked at June. I drove as far as I could go. There were people in the road on Route 70, just walking. I drove around them, and some of them, they turned when the car went by. They turned toward it. "Did any of them get near your car?" I went through a stop sign, and one of them, he was just at a crosswalk, just standing there, and he hit my car when I went through. I kept going. "Did anything come through your window? Did he break the glass?" She shook her head. "He just banged it with his shoulder. I don't know. Is that? Can you get it from that?" "I don't know," I said. "I honestly don't know." I looked at her. "Are you hurt anywhere? At all?" She looked at herself, as if checking. "I scraped my hand when I fell in the woods coming here. That's all." She showed me her palm. A surface scrape, nothing deep. "I'm not... They didn't touch me. I promise." "I believe you," I said. And I did. But I watched her over the next 2 days with the careful attention of someone who knows that not every truth is immediately visible. And she stayed exactly what she appeared to be. A young mother who had driven and walked her way to safety, with nothing but her baby, and the good sense to keep moving. She slept for 14 hours straight that first night. June slept in an improvised sleeping space in a drawer we padded out with blankets. Roy held the baby for a while in the evening, sitting in Floyd's chair with the dog at his feet, and the image of that was so weirdly domestically peaceful, given everything that I stood in the kitchen doorway and just looked at it for a while. On the morning of what I'd started thinking of as day 7, a week since we'd arrived, Craig Feller showed up at the front door. He knocked, not like someone lost or frightened, a confident knock, 3 times, measured. I looked through the gap in the front window plywood. A man in his mid-40s, black hair going gray, tall, carrying a large military-style rucksack. He was wearing civilian clothes, good hiking pants, a technical jacket, but he was wearing them the way military people wear civilian clothes, which is to say, with a posture and an organization that's not quite civilian. He had a handgun holstered at his hip, visible and unobscured by his jacket, which could mean he was showing it deliberately because he wanted us to see he was armed but not hiding the fact, or it could just mean he was careless about it, and I already thought this man was not careless about anything. I went to the door. "Who are you?" "Craig Feller. I'm not sick. I'm not going to cause any trouble. I've been moving through the woods for 3 days looking for a place to stop." "Where from?" "Fairmont, originally. That's south of here." "I know where Fairmont is. What were you doing there?" A pause. "I was in transit," he said. "Between assignments." "What kind of assignments?" A longer pause. "Federal work," he said. "Nothing I can get into specifically. I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm just a man looking to not be in the woods by himself." I opened the door and looked at him. He looked back at me with calm, dark eyes. He was good-looking in a practiced way. The kind of good-looking that came from always knowing exactly what his face was doing. I knew that kind of face. I'd seen it across my desk from kids who'd rehearsed their explanation on the walk to my office. "You can come in for now," I said. "But I need to know what you know. You said federal work. That means you've got information about what's happening that we don't have. I want that information." He smiled, just slightly. "Deal," he said. He came in and met everyone, and shook hands, and made appropriate normal conversation, and he did it well. Too well, maybe. I watched Nora watching him. She's like me in the noticing things department, and I could see her taking him apart, the same way I was. What he told us about the outbreak, that evening, after Patty had put June down and Roy was sitting in his chair with his coffee. It was in the water. Multiple water systems, at least 17 confirmed points of introduction, based on what I knew 3 days ago. That number is probably higher now. He said it the way you'd say the weather forecast. It's not airborne as far as anyone could tell. You get it through contact, ingestion or bloodstream entry through open wounds, bite transmission once someone is infected. "How long does it take?" Roy asked. "To turn?" It varied. The early cases were 4 to 6 hours. Later cases, further from the initial exposure points. The concentration in the water gets more diluted the further out it spreads. So some people were taking longer, up to 48 hours in some cases. "Who introduced it?" I said. Craig looked at me. Unknown. "What were you doing in West Virginia?" Another slight pause. Looking into that question. And I didn't find an answer before things moved too fast to keep looking. I sat with that. The people I saw on the highway. The cars backed up. Our cities completely. The major population centers went fast, he said. Cities are functionally gone. Medium-sized towns. Depends on the water system. How many people drew from the infected points before anyone figured out what was happening. Smaller places with well water, like this area. Lower initial exposure, but the infected spread on foot and by vehicle, so it's just a matter of time. Patty was listening from the corner of the couch, holding June against her shoulder. "There's no government response?" "Nothing. There's response," Craig said. "I just don't know how effective it is at this point." He said that last part in a specific tone that I'd process later but didn't have time to sit with then. He was useful in the first few days. Immediately, demonstrably useful. He had medical training, not EMT level, more than that. And he went through our first aid supplies and reorganized them and showed me 2 things I'd packed wrong that could have mattered. He helped Roy extend the perimeter alarm further north, He did a watch shift without being asked, sitting on the porch with his handgun from 1 to 4 in the morning. I still didn't trust him. I kept watching. Roy, I noticed, also kept watching. We didn't discuss it. We just both quietly watched. The two boys showed up 2 days after Craig, Kevin and Danny Straight, 17 and 15. They came in from the direction of the road, on the track, which was a little alarming. It meant the track was visible enough to follow if you were looking. They came during daylight, which was the only reason we didn't immediately escalate. Kevin was tall and broad-shouldered, and clearly trying to seem more in control than he was. Danny was smaller and had the brittle look of someone who'd been crying recently and was trying to pretend he hadn't. They said they'd walked from Halsey. That was the nearest town, about 9 miles by road, because their parents hadn't come home 3 days ago, and they'd been in their house alone, and then they'd seen something in their neighbor's yard and decided to leave. I didn't ask what they'd seen in their neighbor's yard. They had a backpack between them with some canned food, a knife, and one of those cheap prepaid phones that had long since run out of signal. Kevin said he'd been trying his parents' numbers for 3 days straight. I took them in. I wasn't going to turn away 2 teenagers. I put them to work immediately, partly because I needed help, and partly because I knew that working was the best thing I could give them right now. So that was our group. Me, Nora, Eli, Roy, Patty and June, Craig, and Kevin and Danny. 8 people and a dog, in a 3-acre clearing in the hills. We established routines, because routines were what kept us from coming apart at the seams. Morning watch was Roy from 4 to 7, then me, 7 to noon. Kevin took noon to 4. I'd worked with him on it, and he was steady enough. Craig did a late afternoon watch, and then Roy again in the evening. We ate together at a table that we'd extended by adding a folding table from the tool shed. We rationed carefully. I'd recalculated the food supply with 8 people instead of 3, and we were looking at 3 weeks at normal portions, 5 or 6 at tight rations. I'd told everyone this, and nobody had complained, which told me they were all smart enough to understand the situation. The water from the well tested fine. We boiled it anyway. On day 9 of being at the cabin, I finally drove out. I'd been putting it off. I knew the roads were bad, and I didn't know what I'd find. But we needed to know what was going on in the nearest town. We needed to know what resources were available, and whether the town was passable. I took Roy with me. We took my truck. We went on back roads. I'd been studying the county road map I'd found in Floyd's desk, and we avoided Route 219 entirely. Halsey was mostly empty. That's the simplest way to put it. Most businesses were closed, some with doors standing open. We went through the pharmacy first. It had been hit, probably earlier in the week, but there was still quite a bit left. I found antibiotics, prescription strength, in a back cabinet. Eli's allergy meds in the main aisles. Roy found bandages and wound care supplies. We filled 2 boxes and put them in the truck. The grocery store, a small regional chain, not much bigger than a large convenience store, had been partially cleared. The packaged goods shelves were almost bare, but in the back storage area, we found cases of canned goods that hadn't been moved yet. We loaded as much as the truck could take. I pulled up to the back loading dock and we spent 20 minutes hauling. Roy, for 67, could work. At one point he stopped and held up a hand. I listened. From somewhere south of us, maybe 4 blocks away, sounds. Shuffling, dragging, plural sounds, more than one source. We worked faster. We got back in the truck. We drove back via the same route we'd come, and on the way out of town, we passed the gas station. I stopped. It was a small station, with an attached garage and a convenience store. The garage bay doors were closed. The store's front windows were intact. There were cars at the pumps, 2 of them, with the doors open, keys presumably still in them. I thought about fuel. My truck had just under half a tank. The generator at the cabin was burning through propane at a rate that meant we had maybe 3 weeks before we had to start being very careful. Gas mattered. I pulled up. Roy watched the road while I checked the pumps. Power was out. The pumps wouldn't run without power. I tried to think. I remembered something. Old gas stations, before electronic pumps became standard, had manual overrides. Newer ones had a hand crank for the release valve in case of power failure. I went into the store, moving fast, keeping noise down, and found the back office. There was a key on a hook labeled Pump Manual. I found the procedure taped to the back of the door, a laminated card, the kind of thing a fire marshal makes you post. 2 minutes of reading. Then I went back out and worked through the steps. It took 20 minutes to get the hand pump operational. We filled my truck, filled the 2 5-gallon gas cans we'd brought, and I found 4 more cans in the garage bay. 2 more 5-gallon, 2 smaller, and filled those too. That was maybe 45 gallons of gas. In the store I went through quickly, taking anything with caloric value. Protein bars, canned things. There was a decent selection. Surprisingly, the looters had apparently focused on the packaged chip and snack section and ignored the canned goods. I found 6 large cans of tomato sauce, canned sardines, which I grabbed because they're dense in protein, nuts in sealed bags, dried fruit. On the way back, about 2 miles from the cabin on the county road, Roy said, "Stop." I stopped. On the shoulder of the road, half in, half out of the grass, was a white Ford Transit van. Not old, maybe 3 years old. Federal government plates. The front passenger door was hanging open. The windshield had a crack across the bottom right corner. Roy and I looked at each other. "I'll check it," I said. "I'll cover," Roy said. He already had the rifle up on the doorframe. I got out slow and approached from the rear of the van. No sounds. I came around the driver's side and stopped. There was a man behind the wheel. He was slumped forward, head on the steering wheel, and he was wearing partial hazmat gear, not a full suit, but a respirator mask around his neck, pulled down, and a Tyvek coverall with what looked like a CDC logo on the chest. The respirator was not on his face. He appeared to have been dead for several days. I didn't touch him. I looked through the open passenger door. There was a laptop on the passenger seat. Open, but the screen was dark, battery dead. There was a heavy folder, the kind with brads and multiple sections, lying beside the laptop. And there was a phone, also dark, and a Ziploc bag with a card in it that I took because the writing on the card was too small to read from outside. I took the folder and the Ziploc bag and left everything else, got back in the truck. Roy lowered the rifle. We drove back to the cabin without speaking. That night, after everyone was asleep, I went through the folder. It was technical and partly redacted. Someone had gone through with a black marker and crossed out anything identifying, any specific names, any location-specific designations beyond certain county designations, but enough was there to read. The folder was internal CDC correspondence, supplemented with what looked like DHS briefing documents. The dates went back 8 weeks from when I was sitting there reading it. The basics, stripped of the technical language. The initial contamination had been detected simultaneously at 17 municipal water systems across 8 states. Not sequentially, simultaneously, or close enough to simultaneously that the detection gaps were meaningless. This was not a natural outbreak that spread from a single source. Multiple points, multiple systems, chosen for maximum population exposure. One document used the phrase, "coordinated introduction event," and then the next page of that document was mostly redacted. The CDC had been tracking a cluster of cases in 3 states for 6 weeks before the week I pulled you out of school. 6 weeks, and they hadn't said anything. Or they'd said things to each other and to certain levels of government and not to the public, because saying it to the public would have caused, a sentence began on one page and the rest was blacked out. The last legible page in the folder was a memo dated 4 days after we'd left for the cabin. 3 lines readable. Containment is no longer viable at the regional level. Recommend transition to protocol. Evacuation of essential personnel from zones is authorized. I sat at the table in the dark cabin with the folder open in front of me for a long time. Coordinated introduction event. Multiple water systems, multiple states, simultaneously. Someone had done this. This wasn't an accident, not a natural outbreak. Someone had done this on purpose. I closed the folder. I thought about Trevor Mackey and his uncle at the water treatment plant on Ellery Road, and I thought about the city official who'd read me the script about it being contained, and I thought about what that meant, if this was what I was reading it as. I put the folder in the locked drawer of Floyd's desk and went to bed. I lay in the dark for 2 hours. Then I got up and checked on you both. You were asleep. Eli, you'd fallen asleep with a field guide to insects open on your chest. A page about beetles. I took the book and closed it and put it on the nightstand. I went back to bed and eventually slept. The next morning, before anyone else was up, I heard something I want to describe carefully. It started just before first light, around 6. A sound to the east, maybe half a mile, maybe more. Low, irregular, not an animal sound. I'd heard it twice before in the past few days, and I'd told myself each time it was the wind through the hollow, or a branch rubbing another branch. But this time it was continuous, and this time it was getting slowly closer. I woke Roy. He listened for 30 seconds and said, "How many you think?" "I don't know. Multiple. More than 10? Maybe." I looked at him. "We need to know. I'll take the binoculars to the eastern ridge." He went. I woke Craig, quietly, and told him what was happening. He didn't ask many questions, just got up and got his handgun and went to the east window and looked through the gap. I woke Kevin and told him to keep the shotgun and stay in the main room with Patty and June and Nora and Eli, and to not open any door. Roy came back in 20 minutes. He said, 12, 15. Moving south through the woods, maybe 200 yards east of us right now. They don't seem to know we're here. We were all quiet. They're going to move past us, Craig said, if nobody makes noise. June, Patty said, very quietly. She was holding June tight against her chest. We stood there in the cabin for 35 minutes, not making noise, and June, 7-month-old June, did not make a sound. I don't know if Patty had fed her just right, or if something in the tension of the room communicated itself to the baby, or if it was just luck, but June was quiet. The sounds outside moved south and then grew faint, and then were gone. Nobody said anything for a while after. Eli, you were sitting on the edge of your bunk. You looked at me when it was clear it was over, and you said, "Are they going to come back?" "I don't know, bud." "Probably," Roy said, matter-of-factly. You looked at him and he looked back at you. "Probably doesn't mean definitely," he said. You nodded. You went back to your field guide. I need to tell you about Craig now, because what happened on day 12 changed things. I'd been watching him the whole time. We all had, in different ways. Roy watched him the way Roy watched everything. Quiet, patient, from the side of the room. Kevin watched him with the open wariness of a teenager who hadn't learned to hide his suspicions yet. Nora watched him and didn't say anything to me until she finally said it all at once, which was on day 11, when she cornered me in the kitchen and said, "Dad, he favors his left side. Every time he gets up from the table, every time he lifts something, he leads with his right and his left follows. He's protecting something on his left side." I looked at her. "I know," I said. "You know?" "Yeah, I've been watching." She was quiet for a second. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm thinking about it." "Dad, if he's—" "I know," I said again. "I'm thinking." On day 12, Craig passed out. He was at the table eating breakfast and he set down his spoon and put his head down on the table, and that was that. Not gradual, just down. Kevin was out of his chair before I was. Roy was at the window looking out. I got Craig flat on the floor. He was running a significant fever. I could feel it through his shirt. He was breathing. His pulse was fast but present. I looked at Roy. Roy looked at me. "We need to check his left side," I said. Roy nodded. I pulled up Craig's shirt on the left side. He didn't resist. He wasn't conscious to resist. What I found there was a bite wound, maybe 4 inches long, on the left side of his abdomen, maybe 4 inches above his hip. It had been treated, cleaned, obviously, sometime in the past week, with antiseptic by the look of the staining, and wrapped in gauze that was held in place with electrical tape, which was the most improvised wound care I'd ever seen. The wound was infected in the way wounds get when they're not treated properly and not able to breathe. But the infection looked like it might be turning the corner. The skin around it was pink, but not the angry red I'd have expected for this stage. And here was the thing that sat in the middle of my chest like a cold stone for the next several days. It was 9 days old, minimum. That bite was 9 days old, and Craig was still Craig. I looked at Roy. Roy looked at the bite. He looked at Craig's face. He looked at me. "What does that mean?" I said. Roy said, "I don't know." We put Craig in a bed and let him sleep. He ran the fever for 2 days. Patty, who turned out to have some medical training, she'd been a phlebotomist before she had June, helped manage it. Wet cloths, ibuprofen, water when he could drink. On the second evening, he was lucid enough to talk. He looked at me from the bed. He knew we'd seen it. "I was trying to be useful before," he said. His voice was rough. I figured if I was going to go anyway. "You haven't gone," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I noticed that. Why didn't you tell us?" "I didn't know if I was immune or just slow. I still don't know." He looked at the ceiling. "Where I come from, if you tell people you've been bitten, they make a decision about you. I didn't want anyone making a decision about me. What kind of federal work were you doing?" He looked at me for a long time. The kind where I knew this was coming, and it went wrong anyway. I sat with that. "Were you supposed to prevent it?" "Yes." "And you didn't?" "No." The room was quiet. Outside the cabin, the birds were doing whatever birds do in October, making their small, regular sounds. The fire in the wood stove ticked. "Okay," I said finally. "That's it? What else do you want me to say?" I said. "You're here. You're not turning. Whatever you are, you're not a danger right now. I'll let you know if that changes." He looked at me for another moment. "You're a strange man, Garrett." "I'm a guidance counselor," I said. "We hear a lot." He laughed, which turned into a cough, which took a while to settle. Then he slept. Roy came and stood next to me outside the bedroom door. He spoke very quietly. "If he turns." "I know," I said. "I'll handle it." "I know," I said. Roy nodded and went back to his chair. Craig recovered. By day 14, he was up and eating and doing light work. The bite wound continued to heal. We watched. Nothing changed. He stayed Craig. He was honest with us after that, or as honest as a man from his background was capable of being, which meant he told us things in pieces, and sometimes sideways, but the picture filled in. The coordinated introduction, the thing in the CDC folder. He confirmed it, in his careful way. He said the people responsible were not a government, not exactly, but had government-level resources. He said there were people in certain agencies who'd known it was coming, and had been trying to track the source for years. He said the contamination had been more effective than anyone modeling it had predicted, which was what he said when he meant it had been worse, faster, and more complete than the worst-case scenarios anyone had been willing to put on paper. He said he didn't know if there was a cure. He said he knew of 3 or 4 places, secure facilities, the kind that weren't on any public map, that had maintained containment. Whether any of them were still maintaining it, he didn't know. He said one of them was in Pennsylvania, maybe 400 miles from where we were. I wrote that down and put it in the same drawer as the CDC folder, and didn't say anything to anyone about it. Not yet. On day 16, the convoy came. 3 black SUVs and a box truck. They came up the county road in the mid-afternoon, and we heard them. Engines. A sound we hadn't heard in a week that wasn't our own truck. And everyone went still in the cabin. I watched through the window. They passed on the county road without turning onto our track. I didn't breathe. They drove slow. Not searching slow. More like moving with caution slow. The box truck had no markings. The SUVs had no markings. Then the lead SUV stopped. On the county road, even with the start of our track. I put the .357 in my hand. The door opened. A man got out. He was dressed in tactical gear. Very clean tactical gear. No unit patches. He looked down the track toward the cabin. He couldn't see the cabin from there. I knew that. I'd confirmed it on my first walk of the perimeter. But he was looking. He stood there for maybe 2 minutes. Then he got back in the SUV. They kept driving. I didn't move for a long time after they were gone. Craig came up beside me. He'd been watching too, from the side window. He didn't say anything. "What were they?" I said. "What did the man look like?" I described him. Clean gear, no patches, too relaxed. Craig was quiet. "Okay," he said. "Okay what?" He looked at me. "We should plan to move." I was already planning to move. He looked at me differently then. "Where?" "There's a fire lookout tower about 14 miles into the national forest, north of here. Roy knows the way. It's on a route that you can't reach by vehicle, ATV or on foot only. It's elevated, visible from a distance, but hard to approach without being seen. Floyd used to hike out to it." I paused. "I've been thinking about it for a week." Craig looked at the window. "How much can we carry? We can do cash runs before the main move. Take 2 or 3 trips over 2 days. Cache the bulk of the supplies out there, then make the final move fast." "When?" "Soon. What's your read on those vehicles?" He took a long time before he answered. "They're collecting. People. Resources. I'm not sure exactly. But Garrett, whoever goes with them doesn't come back. At least not anywhere you can find them." He looked at me. "I don't want to go with them." I thought about what Patty had said about the convoy matching that description from the town east of us. "We go in 4 days," I said. "That gives us time for 2 cash runs and to pack the rest." He nodded. He went back to his seat. That evening I told everyone the plan. I laid it out simply, practically. The tower, the route, the cash plan, the timeline. I told them we'd leave in 4 days. I told them I thought it was the right move. Nobody argued. Even Kevin, who'd been quietly resistant to some of my decisions in the early days, just asked practical questions. How far was the walk? What could we carry? Was there water out there? I answered each one. Roy filled in the parts I didn't know. Patty was quiet through all of it and then said, "Can you carry a 7-month-old 14 miles? "We'll rig a carrier," I said. "Between the people we have, we can rotate the baby carry every mile. It's doable." She looked at June, who was on the floor, on a blanket, batting at a piece of string Nora had tied to a chair leg. She looked at me. "Okay," she said. The next 2 days were cash runs. Roy and I went first, taking the ATV. An old 4-wheeler Floyd had stored in the back of the tool shed. We'd gotten it running on day 4, with a loaded trailer. We followed a fire road north into the national forest, then a trail, then Roy's own route that he knew from decades of moving through those hills. The tower was where he said it was, a steel-framed fire lookout, the kind built in the 1960s, a small cab at the top of maybe 60 feet of steel stairs. The cab was locked. Roy used a bolt cutter on the lock. The cab had 4 windows, 1 on each side, and a wood floor, and a small propane stove, and a radio that was old enough it might still work if I could find the right frequency. Below the tower, there was a small ranger's cache building, padlocked, which the bolt cutter also handled. Inside, canned goods, old, maybe 15 years, but still sealed. An emergency generator, much smaller than ours. Firefighting hand tools, which were not what I needed, but were strong and useful for other things. A first aid kit. A box of signal flares I had no intention of using. More propane canisters. We cached our supplies in the building, locked what we could with the good padlock Roy had brought. We went back and came again the next day with more. On the 4th day, moving day, we woke before dawn. I want to describe that morning because I don't want to gloss over it. It was November by then, cold enough that our breath showed. The ground was frozen for the first time, a thin, hard freeze that made the grass crunch. The sky was not quite light yet, just a gray differentiation between the east horizon and the night above it. We packed what remained into backpacks and what we could carry. Patty had June in a carrier strapped to her chest. Eli wore his own pack stuffed with things he'd chosen, his field guide, some tools, the walkie-talkie he'd claimed as his. I did a last sweep of the cabin. I went through every room, the kitchen with Floyd's old mismatched mugs still on their hooks, the main room with his chair and his reading glasses still on the table, the bedroom that you two had been sleeping in. I found, on the nightstand in the kids' bedroom, a drawing. Eli, it was yours. You'd drawn it on a piece of notebook paper in pencil. It was a picture of the cabin, very detailed for a 9-year-old, with trees on all sides, and a smoke line from the chimney, and 5 stick figures in front of it of varying heights. You'd labeled them, me, Nora, Eli, Roy, Patty, and June and Craig and Kevin and Danny were all there in their own approximate heights. Above the cabin you'd drawn a big sun. It was a house and family drawing, the kind kids make when they're 5, except you were 9 and you'd drawn it during the apocalypse. I stood there looking at it for a minute. Then I folded it and put it in my inside jacket pocket. I walked back through the cabin. At the front door, I picked up Floyd's old coat from the hook where it had always hung. I put it on over my own jacket. It smelled like him still. That wood smoke and oil smell. I went out. Everyone was assembled in the clearing, packs on, ready. Hap was at Roy's heel, looking cold and alert. The morning birds were just starting. A single winter wren, doing its thing from somewhere in the trees. Roy looked at me. Ready? I looked back at the cabin once. The windows were all boarded. The door was locked. The generator was off. The fire in the wood stove was out, or close enough to out that by the time the ash cooled, the cabin would be just cold wood again, empty of us. I thought about Floyd building it. I thought about what he would have done in a situation like this. He'd have done exactly what we were doing, I thought. He'd have gone deeper. He'd have gone to higher ground and kept moving. I turned back around. Yeah, I said. Let's go. We moved out across the clearing in a loose group. Roy at the front, with Hap, Kevin and Danny behind him. Craig on the left flank, the way he'd been doing all week. Patty with June in the middle. Nora and Eli just ahead of me at the back. At the edge of the clearing, where the grass meets the tree line, Eli stopped for 1 second. He crouched down and picked something up from the ground. A beetle, I think, by the way he looked at it in his palm. Then he set it back down carefully and stood up and kept walking. The forest closed around us. I want to tell you about the first full week at the fire lookout tower, because in some ways those days are cleaner in my memory than anything before them. The run to the cabin, the 2 weeks getting organized, the arrivals, Craig's revelation, the convoy, all of that has a slightly compressed quality when I think back on it. The way stressful events compress themselves into summary. But those first days at the tower are vivid and specific. The climb to the tower cab on that first day took twice as long as it should have, because we were all carrying heavy packs, and because the steel stairs, while structurally sound, were coated in a thin layer of ice from the overnight freeze, and going up 60 feet of icy steel stairs, with a baby carrier, and a 67-year-old man, and 2 teenagers, and everybody's food supply, requires a certain careful patience. Roy went first, slowly, testing each step. We sent the packs up in a rope relay that Craig rigged. Patty went last with June, and I stayed below her the whole way just in case, which in retrospect might have been a dumb place to be if she'd fallen, but I wasn't thinking about physics. The cab at the top was about 12 feet by 12 feet, barely enough space for everyone, but enough. 4 windows with wooden shutters that latched on the inside. The propane stove worked with a little coaxing. We had sleeping bags, and I'd brought an extra tarp that we laid on the floor for anyone who wasn't on a watch shift. That first night, we'd all be sleeping in shifts. 2 people on watch from the windows at all times, everyone else down on the floor or sitting propped against the wall. It was not comfortable. June wasn't wild about it, but June adapted faster than some of the older people. Because babies adapt. It's the main thing babies are built to do. The view from the tower was the thing. In daylight, in every direction, you could see for miles. Forested ridges, valleys, and where the land flattened out toward the south and east, you could see the distant gray-white smear of where a town should have been. Smoke from 2 directions, south and southwest. Persistent columns that had been burning for days. At night, on the first night, there were no lights visible anywhere on the horizon. Not a single lit window, not a single street light, nothing. The sky was enormous, and black, and full of stars. And below it the land was dark in a way I don't think anyone under 50 years old had ever seen it before. Nora sat at the south window for an hour that first night, looking at the dark where the town should have been. She didn't say anything. I sat next to her for a while. Eventually she said, "Do you think there are other towers like this? Other people who got out and found high ground?" "Yeah," I said. "I do." "A lot of them?" I thought about what I actually believed versus what I thought she needed to hear, and I tried to land somewhere in between. Enough, I said. She leaned against my shoulder. It's not a thing she'd let herself do in about 2 years, and I tried not to make a thing of it. I just sat there. From below, from somewhere in the dark forest, came the sound. The shuffling, dragging sound we'd come to know well. Moving south, moving away from us. We didn't speak. We listened until it was gone. The days at the tower had a structure that we built partly from necessity and partly from the understanding. I think everyone had it. Though we didn't discuss it directly, that structure was what was going to keep us from losing our minds. You can handle almost anything if it's organized. Fear becomes manageable if you can schedule it in. Morning, Roy and Craig did the early watch from 4 to 7, the two most experienced people at the coldest and darkest point of the night. At 7, Kevin took a window, and I took the opposite one. Eli, you'd usually be awake by then too. And you did a useful thing without anyone asking you. You started keeping a log. A notebook, one of the ones I'd packed, and you wrote in it every morning what you'd seen or heard from the windows the night before. What the weather was, what we ate. A 9-year-old's field notes on the apocalypse. The handwriting was large and sometimes the spelling was creative, but the observations were, without fail, accurate and specific. Breakfast was whatever we had that was practical at altitude on a propane stove. Oatmeal, a lot of mornings. Canned soup, heated directly in the can. The dried beans required more time than we usually had, but we did them on the days when activity was low and we could babysit a pot for 2 hours. After breakfast, we divided the day's tasks. There was always something: rationing the food supply, maintaining the staircase. We kept it clear and dry, and we'd rigged a rope pull to bring things up from the cache building below. Keeping the windows clear, managing waste. We'd rigged a system for this, using the edge of the platform on the downwind side, that I will spare you the details of. Watching. A lot of the day was watching. Craig had gotten the radio working, the old one in the cab, and for 3 days he picked through frequencies looking for anything coherent. On the 3rd day he found it. A broadcast, weak and fragmented, on a frequency that wasn't any standard AM or FM band, that appeared to be some kind of survivor or emergency communication. Voices, sometimes clear and sometimes lost to static. Coordinates, or something that sounded like coordinates. A phrase repeated at intervals. Greencastle Station. This is a living broadcast. Please respond if you copy. Greencastle. That's a real place. In Pennsylvania, about 200 miles east of us. I looked at Craig. He had his poker face on, the practiced calm eyes one. But there was something underneath it. Is that the place? I said. The facility you mentioned. He was quiet for long enough that I knew I was right. It might be, he said. It's broadcasting. Yes. Which means it's still standing. Which means something in Greencastle is still operating. Yes. I sat with that. 200 miles. Winter coming. No highways, or highways jammed and dangerous. 8 people. One of them a baby. Can you respond to them? I said. On this radio. Yeah. Range is short, but if there's a relay, probably. Tell them we're here, I said. He looked at me. If I tell them we're here, we're committed to something. They'll send people or they won't. Either way, things change. Things are going to change anyway, I said. We can't stay up here forever. He was quiet. Then he nodded, once. He reached for the radio. I went to the south window while he worked the radio, looking out at the dark forest. Somewhere down there, on the road that ran through the valley, were the black SUVs and the box truck and the people in them, doing whatever they were doing. Somewhere to the south the cities were burning or going dark, and the infected were moving, following sounds, following each other. Vast, slow herds of them covering the roads and the small towns and the fields between. And somewhere to the east, 200 miles, something was still broadcasting. Someone was still there. I thought about the drawing in my pocket. 5 stick figures and a sun over a cabin. I thought about how you'd drawn it, Eli. Carefully, taking your time, getting all of us in. I turned away from the window. Craig was at the radio with his headset on, saying, Greencastle Station. This is a survivor group in the Allegheny Highlands. Do you copy? We are 8 people, including a child and an infant. Do you copy? Static. Static. Then, something. A voice. Thin and fragmented. Barely there. We all leaned in. Even Hap raised his head. The voice came back. Stronger this time. Just barely. Highlands Group, we copy. Say your number again. Craig looked at me. I nodded. He pressed the transmit key. 8. We are 8. The static filled the cab, and then the voice came back, and this time it was clear enough. Highlands Group, stay on this frequency. We'll reach back in 6 hours. Stay safe. Craig took the headset off. He looked at the radio for a second. Then he looked around the cab at everyone. Roy, impassive, hands around his coffee mug. Patty with June on her shoulder, eyes wide. Nora with her arms crossed the way she always holds herself when she's trying not to show what she's feeling. Danny and Kevin looking at each other. Eli with his notebook. I said, okay, we wait. We waited. The 6 hours were the longest 6 hours I can remember. We kept the watches. We ate. Eli filled 2 more pages in his notebook. Roy and Craig played a wordless game of cards at the corner of the floor. Patty walked June in the small square of available walking space, back and forth, which was the only thing that kept the baby from fussing. Kevin and Danny sat at the north and east windows alternately. Nora came and sat by me at the south window after about 2 hours of it. Dad. Yeah. What's Greencastle? It's a town in Pennsylvania, about 200 miles. Is it safe there? I thought about how to answer that honestly, without answering it in a way that would unravel her. Craig thinks there's a facility there that might have maintained containment, a secure place. So if we get there, we'd have more resources, more people, more options. She thought about that. 200 miles. Yeah. How would we go? Working on that. She was quiet for a minute. Outside the window, the light was the flat gray of an overcast November afternoon, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly desaturated. The forest below the tower was bare now. The leaves had come down fast in the last week, and you could see deeper into the trees than you could before. Through the bare branches, the ground was visible and empty. I'm scared, Nora said. She said it very quietly, in the tone of someone who has been not saying something for a long time and has finally run out of reasons not to. I know, I said. Me too. She looked at me. You are? Yeah. I'm scared a lot. You don't look it. I do it on the inside. I looked at her. You've been doing really well, you know that? Both of you. Eli especially. Eli treats it like a camping trip. Maybe that's the right way to treat it. She almost smiled. Almost. It's the longest camping trip in history. It really is. She leaned into my shoulder again, briefly, and then straightened up and went back to looking out the window with the serious expression that was her default these days. At the 6-hour mark, Craig was at the radio. The voice came back, clearer now, which meant they'd adjusted something on their end. Highlands Group, this is Greencastle Station. We've got your position approximate from your transmission. We're sending a team, 2 vehicles, back routes, estimated 48 to 72 hours depending on conditions. What's your situation? Craig looked at me. I moved closer. He handed me the mic. I looked at it for a second. Then I pressed the key. Greencastle Station. This is the Highlands Group. Situation is 8 people. 1 infant, 1 child, 1 elderly man, 5 adults. We have supplies. We have a defensible position. No infected in our immediate area. We can hold as long as we need to. I paused. We also have a recovered bite case. 1 adult, bitten 12 days ago, not turned. We've been monitoring. I released the key. The static went on long enough that I thought I'd said the wrong thing. Then, Highlands Group, confirm. Recovered bite, 12 days, no turn. Confirmed. Another pause. Highlands Group. That is, okay. We'll want to assess that when we arrive. This is important information. We're still coming. 48 to 72 hours. I set the mic down. I looked at Craig. He looked back at me. His expression was the most unguarded I'd seen it. 12 days, he said, quietly. They reacted to that. Yeah. That means they know something about it. Yeah, I said. It does. He looked at his hands, then out the window, then at me. You told them. You were going to tell them eventually, I said. Better to have them know before they get here than to have it come out wrong when they arrive. He was quiet. You're a strange man, Garrett. You said that before. It's still true. I went back to the south window. Below the tower, in the Rangers' cash building, we had enough food for 3 weeks. In the cab, we had everyone we'd managed to collect and keep alive. In my jacket pocket, I had a drawing of a cabin and 5 stick figures and a sun. The sky through the south window was going orange at the edges, where the sun was setting behind the clouds, the specific orange of a November late afternoon in the mountains, and the forest below was dark and bare and still. 48 to 72 hours. I thought about all the things between here and Greencastle. 200 miles of back roads through a dead country, infected moving through the dark black SUVs with no markings, going place to place collecting something. I thought about Craig's bite healing wrong. I thought about the standing shape in the tree line, and the deer carcass, and what that might or might not mean. I thought about the CDC folder in Floyd's desk back at the cabin, locked in a drawer. The words "coordinated introduction event" burned into my memory. I thought about the fact that I'd pulled you 2 out of school on a Wednesday because I'd noticed 7 absences on an attendance report and a nurse hadn't shown up to work, and my brother had used a scared voice on the phone. I thought about how that sequence of small noticing things, stacked on top of each other, had led to all of this, to this tower, to this group of people, to Craig's immune blood and Eli's field notes, and Patty's baby sleeping on a tarp on a wooden floor 60 feet above the Allegheny forest. I wondered if I'd gotten all of us here to be safe, or I'd gotten all of us here to be part of something I didn't fully understand yet. Both things could be true. In my experience, both things usually were. I turned back from the window. Eli was at the east window, his notebook open, writing something with the focused intensity you bring to everything that interests you. "What are you writing?" I asked. You looked up. "I'm writing about the birds," you said. "I saw a pileated woodpecker this morning, on the dead oak to the east. He was really loud. I was the only one who saw it." "That's a good one," I said. "The big ones with the red head?" "Yeah." You looked at your notebook. I wrote, "Pileated woodpecker, 0812, east-northeast, old dead oak, about 40 feet, working a hole in the bark, probably looking for beetle larvae." You looked up at me. "Is that the right way to write it?" "That's exactly right," I said. You went back to your notebook. Outside, the orange in the sky deepened. Somewhere below, a woodpecker, maybe yours, maybe not, was still working its hole, the regular sound of something alive, doing what it needed to do. 48 to 72 hours. We'd be ready. I want to finish this account, at least this part of it, the part that starts 3 days before everything fell apart and ends here in this tower, by telling you something that I've been carrying since the night I sat on Floyd's porch and watched the shape in the tree line. I am a guidance counselor, or I was. My job was to sit with young people who were in trouble, in whatever kind of trouble teenagers get themselves into, which is every kind, and help them figure out what they needed. Not what they wanted, what they needed. Those are different things. My job was to notice the difference. I've been trying to do the same thing here, every day. Notice what we need. Look at what's actually in front of me, not what I'm afraid of seeing or what I hope to see. Floyd's lesson. Look at what's there. What's there right now? 8 people alive, in a defensible position, with 3 weeks of supplies, an immune man we don't understand yet, a baby who hasn't made a sound at a wrong moment since we got here, a 67-year-old who knows these mountains better than the mountains know themselves, a 17-year-old who carries the 12 gauge without being asked and positions himself at the window without needing to be told, a 15-year-old who started laughing again 3 days ago at something your sister said, and the sound of it was a lot. A 9-year-old writing field notes about woodpeckers. A 14-year-old who was angry about a French Revolution test. That's what's in front of me. That's what's there. The radio crackled. Craig checked it and adjusted. More static. He held up a hand. Not a contact, just interference. And we all exhaled and went back to what we were doing. 48 to 72 hours. I went back to the window and looked south. Somewhere out there the road was dark, and the cities were quiet in the wrong way. And whatever was coming our way, or going away from us, was doing it on its own schedule, with its own logic, that we were still working out. The sky above all of it was enormous. The stars would be there again tonight when the clouds moved off, the way they'd been every clear night since we came into these mountains. And they'd be there the night after, and the one after that. I leaned against the window frame and listened to the forest. The woodpecker had stopped. The wind moved through the bare branches with a sound like water, somewhere far south. So far it was barely there. Something that could have been an engine, or could have been the wind itself. The fire in the small propane stove made its low sound. June made her small sleep sound. Hap breathed at Roy's feet. Outside the tower, the last of the orange went out of the sky. I stood at the window until it was dark. Then I took the first watch and let the others sleep. I'm going to skip ahead now, not because what comes next isn't worth telling, but because some of what comes next I'm still working out how to talk about. You'll hear it when you're ready. You'll be ready sooner than I want. What I can tell you is this. The Greencastle team came. They came on the morning of the third day. 4 people in 2 vehicles that were older and quieter than the black SUVs. The kind of unassuming vehicles chosen specifically to not look like resources. They came up the fire road and parked and radioed ahead before they got out of the vehicles, which was the first thing that made me feel like they were the right kind of people. The woman who led the team, Dr. Rachel Birch, who I'll tell you about properly sometime, because she deserves her own account. She was the one who sat down with Craig and looked at the bite wound and asked him questions for an hour while the rest of us watched and tried to read the situation in her face. And I'll tell you what she said after, because you were both in the room. She said, "We've been looking for this." She said it to Craig, but she said it in the voice of someone saying something for the room. Roy didn't change expression. Patty looked at the baby. Kevin and Danny looked at each other. Nora looked at me. I looked at Craig. He looked back at me with those calm eyes, and for once the calm seemed real rather than practiced. 12 days, Dr. Birch said, and you're sitting here. She made a note in a small notebook. What were you doing in the days before you were bitten? Moving fast, Craig said. Not sleeping, not eating much. Stress response, cortisol. She made another note. We've got 3 other cases, none of them this far out from exposure. You're the furthest. She looked up. Does your arm hurt? Sometimes, less than it did. She nodded slowly. Okay. She closed the notebook. She looked at the rest of us. We're moving everyone. All 8, plus us 4. We've got room. The road south is manageable before noon if we move now. Is Greencastle? What is it exactly? I said. She looked at me. Not evasively, just measuring. It's a pre-existing federal research facility that got lucky with its location and unlucky with its mandate. We've been working on this for 8 months. We have, she paused. We have reasons to think something can be done about it. A cure, Danny said from the corner. His voice cracked a little. He was 15. She looked at him. Something, she said carefully. Something. We're working. Danny nodded. He pressed his lips together. I stood up. When do we move? Now, she said. Pack only what you'll carry personally. The medical supplies and remaining food come with us in the vehicles. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. I went to the east window and stood there for a moment. The forest below was bright in the morning light. Thin November light, pale and flat. The kind that makes everything look a little washed out. The dead oak where you'd seen the woodpecker, Eli. I looked at it. The hole it had made was visible from here, a perfect oval in the bark. I thought about what the next thing was. Not the next hour, or the next day, or the next 100 miles. Just the next thing. Pack what you'll carry. Go down the stairs. Get in the vehicle. Move south. That was the next thing. I turned away from the window. You were both already packing. Nora, efficient and quick, rolling the sleeping bag tight the way I'd shown you. Eli, carefully, your notebook on top so it was the last thing in, the first thing out. Ready? I said. You both looked at me. Nora gave me the look she's given me her whole life. That means yes, and also obviously, and also, I was born ready. You don't have to ask. Eli said, did you know pileated woodpeckers mate for life? I didn't know that, I said. They do, you said. Roy told me. You finished zipping your pack. It seems like a good system. It does, I said. We went down the stairs. That's where I'm going to stop this account for now. Not because it's over. It wasn't over, not for a long time after that. And there are parts I haven't told you yet that I'll tell you when I can. But this is where the thing that started with 7 names on an attendance report finds its shape. This is where I can look back at the guidance counselor who noticed something wrong on a Tuesday morning and drove 300 miles with his kids in their pajamas and boarded up windows with plywood and found himself in a fire tower in November with a dog named Hap and an immune federal agent and a baby who chose her moments well. I was not special. I was not a survivalist or a soldier or a man built for catastrophe. I was someone who had spent 15 years training himself to notice the thing behind the thing. And this time, the thing behind the thing was enormous. And I noticed it 3 days before most people had to reckon with it. And those 3 days were the difference. Nora, you asked me once, in the cabin, before everything got as serious as it got, whether I thought I'd made the right choice, pulling you two out, all of it. I told you I'd let you know. I'm letting you know now. Yeah, I made the right choice. I got lucky too. Lucky in ways I couldn't have planned. Lucky with the people who showed up. Lucky that Craig's blood held something nobody understood yet. Lucky that the tower was there, and the cash building had what it had. Luck matters. I'm not going to pretend I planned all of it. But I noticed the absences. I listened to your sister when she told me Craig's left side was wrong. I went through the CDC folder instead of leaving it in the van. I set the cameras at the tree line. I planned the tower move before we needed it. I noticed things, and I acted on what I noticed. That's all this is. That's what I want you to take from it. Notice what's in front of you, not what you want to see. What's there? Write it down if you have to. Like field notes for a woodpecker you might never see again.